He smirked, inking the divorce decree, convinced I was a destitute nobody, yet he stiffened when the judge unsealed an envelope unveiling my colossal financial secret, transforming his triumph into a dread that would shatter his whole existence permanently. Can you believe the audacity? He signed those divorce papers, then looked at me, tilting his pen like he'd just won the lottery. He thought this divorce was his victory. But what he didn't know, he was about to become the punchline. My name is Chloe Harris. And for the last 3 years, I'd been practically invisible in my own home. The rain was just hammering against the window of our tiny walk-up in South Baltimore. A relentless, gray rhythm that felt as cold as the peeling paint on the sill. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, the kind of damp that chills you to the bone, even indoors. The radiator in the corner was hissing and clanking, fighting a losing battle against the November chill. But Caleb? He didn't seem to feel the cold at all. He was standing in front of the microwave, using its dark, reflective glass as a mirror to adjust his tie. A silk tie, deep crimson, bought just 2 weeks ago. An investment for his image, he'd called it. He smoothed the knot, tilted his chin up, checked his teeth. He looked like he was prepping for a photo shoot, totally out of place in a kitchen where the linoleum was curling at the edges, and the air always smelled faintly of stale coffee and old drywall. He didn't look at me. He hadn't really looked at me in months. To him, I was just part of the furniture. Another worn-out thing in this apartment he was so desperate to leave behind. I need this done today, Chloe, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He turned from the microwave, picked up a thick manila envelope from the counter. He tossed it onto the small dining table where I sat, nursing a mug of lukewarm tea. The envelope slid across the surface, stopping inches from my hand. Sign it, he smirked, just a hint of it playing on his lips. You've leeched off me long enough. I looked at the envelope. I didn't need to open it. I knew exactly what the legal jargon inside said. We'd been dancing around this for weeks, ever since he landed that big settlement case that put his name on the partner track at his firm. Success hadn't made him generous. It had made him cruel. It had given him the confidence to discard anything he thought was weighing him down. I set my mug down. My hand was steady. I looked up at him, taking in the sharp cut of his suit, the new, almost artificial posture he held himself with. He was handsome, conventionally so, the kind of face that always seemed to expect forgiveness for its flaws. But I saw the tension in his jaw. I saw the insecurity he tried to bury under expensive cologne and aggressive ambition. Do you have a pen? I asked softly. He huffed, an exaggerated sound of annoyance, patting his pockets. He pulled out a sleek silver fountain pen, another recent purchase, and dropped it onto the papers. Make it quick. I have a strategy meeting at 9, and I don't have time to babysit your emotions. I uncapped the pen. The nib was gold, sharp, precise. I opened the document to the last page, skipping all the paragraphs detailing the assets we didn't have and the debts he claimed were mutual. I found the line marked for my signature. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him why. I didn't remind him of all the nights I stayed up helping him organize his case files when he was an overwhelmed associate, or the months I covered the rent with my meager administrative salary so he could pay his bar association fees. None of that mattered to the man standing in front of me. I pressed the pen to the paper. Chloe Harris. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. Caleb watched me. And I could feel his disappointment. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to plead, to throw things, to give him a reason to call me crazy. He needed to be the victim of a clingy, irrational wife so that his narrative would be complete. My silence? It robbed him of that satisfaction. He pulled his phone out while I signed the duplicate copy. The screen lit up, reflecting on his face. His expression softened instantly, shifting from contempt to this greasy, fake charm. I knew exactly who was on the other end of that message. Madison Price. 24, a paralegal at his firm, with bright eyes and an eagerness to be close to power, even the illusion of it. Yeah, I'm leaving now, he said, not to me, but dictating a voice note as he tapped the screen. Just wrapping up the final baggage. See you at the office. Wear that blue thing I like. He hit send and looked back at me, sliding the signed papers out from under my hand before the ink was even fully dry. He checked the signature, satisfied. Finally, he muttered. He shoved the papers into his leather briefcase, the latch clicking shut with a sound like a pistol hammer. You know this is for the best, Chloe. You were never going to fit in where I'm going. I need someone who understands the pressure of my world. Someone who can keep up. He walked to the door, grabbing his trench coat from the hook. He paused with his hand on the knob, looking back at me one last time. He wanted to twist the knife. He needed to feel like he'd won something more than just a legal separation. Once the court finalizes this, you're on your own, he said, his voice loud, projecting as if he were already in a courtroom delivering a closing argument. No alimony, no support. You figure out your own rent. Don't come crying to me when reality hits you. Don't follow my life, Chloe. You're in the rearview mirror now. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. Goodbye, Caleb, I said. He sneered, disappointed by my lack of venom, and opened the door. The damp wind swirled into the apartment, carrying the noise of morning traffic. He stepped out and slammed the door shut behind him. The vibration rattled the frame of the cheap art print on the wall. I listened to his footsteps retreating down the hallway, heavy and fast. Then the sound of the main building door opening and closing. Silence returned to the room, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Slowly, I lifted my left hand and touched my right wrist. For years, I'd worn a simple, tarnished silver bracelet there. It was cheap, nondescript, something a woman named Chloe Harris would wear. I had taken it off 10 minutes before Caleb walked into the kitchen. My skin felt bare where the metal used to sit. It felt light. It felt like a shackle had been removed. I rubbed the spot with my thumb. A phantom sensation of weight lifting off me. I wasn't locking something away. I was unlocking who I actually was. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. I watched as Caleb emerged onto the wet sidewalk below. He opened a large black umbrella and marched toward his leased sedan, stepping over a puddle without looking down. He thought he was walking toward freedom. He thought he was walking toward a future where he was the star. I turned away from the window and walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one Caleb called my hobby station. He thought I used it for scrapbooking or paying the utility bills. I opened the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath a stack of old knitting magazines was a thin black notebook. Unremarkable on the outside, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for $2. I placed it on the table where the divorce papers had just been. I opened it. There were no diary entries about heartbreak. No tear-stained pages wondering where our love went. Instead, the pages were filled with columns of data, written in my precise, microscopic handwriting. October 14th, 7:45 p.m. Dinner at Leland with Madison Price. Billed to client account, generic expense code 402. Amount, $312. November 2nd, transfer of funds from joint savings to undeclared LLC, CP Ventures. Amount, $4,500. November 10th, email correspondence regarding unauthorized disclosure of grand jury witness list forwarded to personal server. I turned the page. Pasted neatly onto the paper were copies of receipts he thought he'd thrown away, photographs of text messages taken while he slept, and a timeline of every ethical violation he'd committed in the last 18 months. Caleb thought I was a simple woman who was bad with numbers. He thought I was Chloe Harris, the quiet wife who needed him to survive. He had no idea that he had just handed a loaded gun to the daughter of Elias H. Halstead. I picked up the pen he'd left behind. So eager to leave, he forgot his new silver toy. I turned to a fresh page. I wrote the date, November 16th. Underneath it, divorce papers signed. I closed the notebook. The game hadn't ended with his signature. It had just begun. The world, you see, acts under the assumption that power screams. It believes that true wealth is a golden tower with a name written in 20-foot letters across the top, or a tech CEO ranting on social media. I was raised to understand that those people are merely the loud ones. Real power is silence. Real power is the tectonic plate that shifts beneath the ocean, invisible until the moment it swallows the coastline. My driver's license says Chloe Harris. My social security card. My bank accounts and the lease on that apartment, all bear that name. It's not a fake name, exactly. It's a curated one. It's a mask I crafted to walk among the living without being consumed by them. My birth certificate reads Chloe H. Halstead. If you search for the name Halstead on the internet, you won't find scandals or billionaire rankings. You might find a few obituaries from the 19th century, or a small town in Kansas. You won't find my father, Elias H. Halstead. You won't find him because he spent 40 years erasing his footprints before he even took the steps. My father doesn't own consumer brands. He doesn't sell phones or cars or designer handbags. Elias Halstead owns the things that make those other things possible. He owns the maritime insurance firms that underwrite 60% of global cargo. He holds the controlling interest in the logistics chains that move grain across the Atlantic. He owns the mineral rights to vast tracts of land in places most Americans couldn't find on a map, places where the strategic metals for every battery and microchip are dug from the earth. His wealth isn't liquid cash sitting in a vault. It's the blood in the veins of the global economy. It's a number so large that Forbes doesn't list it because their researchers literally don't know where to look. I learned the necessity of shadows when I was 7. There was a specific afternoon involving a black van, a security detail that had been compromised, and 3 days where my father didn't sleep until the threat was neutralized. It was a kidnapping plot, sophisticated and terrifying. After that, the edict was absolute. We became ghosts. I was taught that money is a tool, like a hammer or a scalpel, but it is never an identity. My father told me once, "If you have to tell someone you're rich, you've already lost the leverage." But the most important lesson Elias H. Halstead taught me was about the human condition. He said that you never truly know a person when you're standing on a pedestal. People look up at you with calculated adoration. They smile because they want something. To see the truth of a human soul, you must stand beneath them. You must let them believe you are of no consequence. Only when a person thinks you are worthless will they show you who they really are. That's why I came to Baltimore. That's why I became Chloe Harris. I wanted a life that belonged to me, not my inheritance. I wanted to know if I could survive on a salary that required budgeting for groceries. I wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen for myself, not for the empire attached to my DNA. I took a job as an administrative assistant at Bramwell & Kersey LLP. It was a mid-tier law firm, respectable but hungry, filled with associates who smelled like desperation and cheap coffee. My job was to file motions, organize calendars, and listen to attorneys complain about their billable hours. I was invisible. I was the furniture. And it was there, in the fluorescent hum of the copy room, that I met Caleb. He was different back then. Or perhaps, I just wanted him to be. Caleb was 27, drowning in $150,000 of student debt, and terrified he was going to wash out. He didn't have the custom suits or the crimson ties. Then, he wore off-the-rack shirts that were slightly too big in the shoulders. He stayed late every night, not because he was important, but because he was slow and meticulous and afraid of making a mistake. I remember finding him in the break room one Tuesday night at 11. He was staring at a vending machine, looking utterly defeated because his credit card had been declined for a bag of pretzels. I bought them for him. $1.50. He looked at me with eyes that were so unguarded, so grateful, it felt like a physical touch. We sat on the plastic chairs and talked for an hour. He told me about his fear of failure. He told me he wanted to be a great lawyer, not for the money, but because he wanted to win for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He seemed so earnest. He seemed like a man who understood struggle. I fell in love with that version of him. I fell in love with the Caleb who needed me. The Caleb who saw kindness in a $1.50 bag of pretzels. I married him 18 months later. I signed the prenup he insisted on, a standard document to protect his future earnings, without batting an eye. I kept my secret. I didn't tell him about the Halstead Trust. I didn't tell him that the cheap watch I wore was a vintage piece worth more than his parents' house, deliberately scuffed to look old. I wanted to be his partner, not his financier. I wanted to build a life on the ground floor. I thought my anonymity was a gift I was giving us. I thought it was a foundation of trust. I was wrong. As Caleb began to succeed, the very normalcy I had cultivated became his justification for resentment. When he won his first major case, he didn't come home to celebrate with me. He went out with the partners. When he started making real money, he stopped looking at me as a partner and started seeing me as an anchor. He began to view my administrative job not as honest work, but as a lack of ambition. He saw my thriftiness not as prudence, but as a small-mindedness he had outgrown. He mistook my silence for stupidity. He mistook my simplicity for poverty. It was a slow, agonizing reveal. The man who once thanked me for a bag of pretzels began to critique the way I dressed for his firm dinners. He began to check the grocery receipts, demanding to know why I spent $5 on bread. He started hiding his phone. He started using a tone of voice that he reserved for wait staff and telemarketers. A tone of polite, sneering superiority. I watched it happen. I watched him shed his humility like a snake shedding skin. He didn't just fall out of love with me. He became embarrassed by me. He needed a woman who reflected his new status. Someone shiny and loud, like Madison Price. He needed a prop, not a wife. And through it all, I never broke character. I never screamed, "Do you know who I am?" I never threw a bank statement in his face to shut him up. I held on to the lesson my father taught me. I let him believe I was nothing. I let him believe I was weak. I let him treat me like a discardable object because I needed to be absolutely certain. I needed to know that there was nothing left of the man I met in the break room. Today, when he slid those divorce papers across the table, he confirmed it. The test was over. Caleb had failed in the most spectacular way possible. He thought he was cutting loose a dead weight. He had no idea he was severing his connection to the only person who could have given him the world he so desperately craved. He wanted the high life. He wanted power. He wanted to be untouchable. He could have had it all, had he simply been a decent man. Now, he would get none of it. I stood in the center of the silent apartment. The ghost of his cologne still lingered in the air. A scent called success, or something equally banal. I picked up my phone. Not the cheap model I used around him, but the secure, encrypted device I kept in the false bottom of my sewing kit. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It rang once. "Miss Halstead," a voice answered. It was deep, calm, and sounded like old mahogany. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the executive of the Halstead Family Trust, and the only man my father trusted completely. "It's done, Arthur," I said. My voice didn't shake. "The papers are signed, I see," Arthur replied. There was no pity in his tone, only efficiency. "We have been monitoring the situation as you requested. The file on Mr. Caleb Vance is comprehensive. Are you ready to proceed with the next phase?" "Yes," I said. "Initiate the protocol." "And Arthur?" "Yes, Miss H. Make sure the probate documents are delivered to the courtroom exactly when the judge calls the docket number. I want the timing to be impeccable. Consider it done. Welcome back, Chloe." I hung up. I looked around the apartment one last time. It was a cage I had built for myself, but the door was open now. I was done being Chloe Harris, the administrative assistant. It was time to remind the world, and Caleb Vance, what happens when you wake a sleeping giant. Success is a drug. And Caleb Vance had absolutely no tolerance for it. The change didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual corrosion, like rust eating through the undercarriage of a car. It started when he won the women's settlement, a personal injury case that brought in a contingency fee of 6 figures for the firm. Suddenly, the man who used to check the price of eggs was researching bespoke tailors in DC and reading magazines about cigar investments. He began to curate his life, and the first thing he realized? I didn't fit the aesthetic. I remember the company holiday party at the Four Seasons in December. I wore a simple navy dress, something elegant but understated, bought off the rack at a department store. Caleb wore a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Throughout the night, he introduced me to the senior partners with a tight, apologetic smile. "This is Chloe," he'd say, his hand resting heavy and possessive on my shoulder, steering me slightly away from the conversation. "She keeps the home fires burning. Not much for legal talk, are you, honey?" He'd laugh, a sharp, practiced sound, and pivot his body to cut me out of the circle. I stood there, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching him perform. He was electric. I'll give him that. He had learned to mimic the cadence of the wealthy, adopting their posture and their easy confidence. But to me, he looked like a child wearing his father's shoes. Then Madison Price appeared. 24, fresh out of a paralegal program, and hungry in a way that terrified me. She had blonde hair that was always perfectly blown out, and a laugh that seemed calibrated to stroke the male ego. She didn't just walk into a room, she announced herself. "Caleb!" she chirped, sliding up to him with a familiarity that made the air between them vibrate. She ignored me completely, her eyes locked on his lapel. "That pocket square is genius. Is that the silk blend we talked about?" Caleb beamed. He actually puffed out his chest. "You have a good eye, Madison. Chloe here thought it was a bit much. Did she not?" He glanced at me, his eyes cold. "She prefers things simpler." "Oh, well," Madison said, finally looking at me with a pitying smile that felt like a slap. "Some people are just comfortable in the background. It takes a certain kind of person to appreciate the finer details of the game." That was the dynamic. I was the anchor. She was the wind. Madison made Caleb feel like a king. I made him feel like a fraud, because I knew who he was when the tuxedo came off. The abuse shifted from social to financial with terrifying speed. "I'm taking over the household accounts," he announced one evening in January, closing his laptop with a snap. "You're not good with numbers, Chloe. I saw the utility bill. You paid it 2 days early. Do you know how much interest we lose by moving liquidity too soon? It's inefficient." It was absurd. We were talking about pennies, but he needed control. He needed to be the CFO of our marriage. "If that makes you happy, Caleb," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's not about happiness. It's about strategy," he corrected condescendingly. "I need to leverage our cash flow. You just stick to the groceries and try to keep the budget down. I'm putting us on a strict allowance." The irony was suffocating. I, who had been trained by the finest forensic accountants in the world to track assets across 3 continents, was being put on an allowance by a man who had just leased a Porsche he could barely afford to insure. But I let him do it. I handed over the passwords. I let him criticize my purchase of generic laundry detergent. And while he played the big man, I began to watch. He thought that because he changed the passwords, I was locked out. He didn't know that I had installed a keystroke logger on our shared desktop computer 6 months prior, disguised as a driver update for the printer. Every night, while he slept, I reviewed the logs. I saw the emails to Madison. They started as work banter, deadlines, court dates, but quickly devolved into late-night confessions. "She doesn't get me like you do," he wrote at 2 in the morning. "I feel like I'm suffocating in mediocrity when I'm at home." I saw the restaurant bills. $300 for sushi on a Tuesday when he told me he was working late on a deposition. A weekend trip to a spa in Virginia, listed as a client development seminar. But the real knife in the back came in February. I was cross-referencing our tax documents when I found a discrepancy in his credit report. There was an inquiry from a bank I didn't recognize. I dug deeper. Using a backdoor access into the state's business registry, a trick Arthur had taught me when I was 19. I found it, Vance Strategic Holdings LLC. It was a shell company incorporated 4 months ago. And when I pulled the articles of incorporation, my blood ran cold. He had listed himself as the manager. But for the guarantor, the person whose credit was used to secure the initial $50,000 business line of credit, he had used a specific name, Chloe Harris. He had forged my signature. He had used my social security number. He had maxed out his own credit cards, buying suits and dinners for Madison. So, he had stolen my identity to fund his affair and his ego. He was dumping his debt onto me, setting up a fall guy scenario. If the firm failed, or if he got caught, the debt would be in my name. I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the lie. Most women would have screamed. They would have woken him up, thrown the laptop at his head, and demanded a divorce right then and there. I didn't. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. This was no longer a marriage. This was a transaction that had gone bad. And in business, when a partner attempts to defraud you, you do not get emotional. You liquidate them. I saved the documents to an encrypted cloud drive. I took screenshots of the digital signatures. I traced the flow of money from the credit line into his personal PayPal account, and from there to jewelry stores and hotels. I built the file. I became a machine. The next morning, I poured his coffee just the way he liked it. "Here you go," I said, placing the mug on the counter. He barely looked up from his phone. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning? The blue suit needs to be ready for the partners' meeting tomorrow. I'll get it this afternoon," I said softly. "Good. And Chloe?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "Try to do something with your hair. We might run into people." "I'll try," I said. He left without a kiss. I spent the afternoon securing my own exit. I moved my personal emergency funds, the small amount I kept from my admin's salary, into a new account he couldn't touch. I packed a go bag and hid it in the trunk of my car. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a New York area code. I answered it, stepping away from my desk at the law firm where I still pretended to work. "Hello, Miss Chloe Halstead," a voice said. It wasn't Arthur this time. It was a woman, sharp and professional. "This is the clerk from the Office of Probate and Wills in Delaware. I am calling to confirm receipt of the final affidavit regarding the estate of Elias Halstead." I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I had been holding for years. "I'm listening," I said. "The execution order is ready," the woman continued. "Your father's final directive has been processed. The entirety of the Halstead Trust, including the maritime subsidiaries and the mineral rights portfolio, is ready for transfer to your sole control upon the dissolution of your current marital status. The lawyers have the probate package sealed and marked urgent for the court." "Thank you," I said. "Do you want us to mail it to your residence?" "No," I said, watching Madison Price walk past my desk, giggling at something on her phone. "Send it directly to the judge. Harbor County Family Court, Courtroom 4B, tomorrow morning at 9. "Understood, Ms. Halstead." I hung up the phone. Caleb thought he was discarding a burden. He thought he was stripping me of my dignity. But as I watched him high-five a colleague in the glass-walled conference room, laughing at a joke that was probably at my expense, I knew the truth. He wasn't divorcing a wife. He was declaring war on an empire, and he had just run out of ammunition. The hallways of the Harbor County Family Court smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. It was a place where lives were dissected and divided into percentages, where love went to die under the fluorescent hum of government lighting. Most people walked these corridors with their heads down, carrying the weight of failure in their slumped shoulders. But not Caleb. He arrived as if he were attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a building named after him. I was sitting on a hard wooden bench near the entrance of Courtroom 4B, my hands folded in my lap. I wore a charcoal gray dress that I'd owned for 5 years. It was modest, fading slightly at the seams, the kind of garment that makes a person blend into the background. I looked like exactly what Caleb said I was, a woman with nothing, about to lose the little she had left. Caleb strode off the elevator with Gordon Slate, his high-priced attorney. Gordon was a man who charged $600 an hour to intimidate people, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. They were laughing. Caleb said something, gesturing with a wide, expansive hand, and Gordon chuckled, shaking his head. They looked like two old friends heading to a golf course, not a husband and his lawyer arriving to end a marriage. And then I saw her. Madison Price. She wasn't supposed to be here. Usually, the other woman stays hidden until the ink is dry. But Caleb was so confident, so drunk on his own narrative of victory, that he brought her along. She wore a cream-colored blazer and a skirt that was technically professional, but cut aggressively short. She scanned the hallway, her eyes landing on me. She didn't look away. Instead, she offered a small, tight smile. A victor's smile. Caleb saw me then. He didn't say hello. He checked his watch, a bulky diver's watch he'd bought on credit last month, and then leaned in to whisper to Gordon. His voice wasn't as quiet as he thought it was. Let's make this quick, Gordon. She has nothing to claim. I just want the decree signed so I can get back to the office by noon. Gordon glanced at me, his eyes skimming over my plain dress and scuffed shoes. He dismissed me instantly. Don't worry, Caleb. Standard dissolution. No assets, no children. We'll be out of here in 20 minutes. They walked past me into the courtroom. Madison paused as she passed Caleb, her hand reaching out to brush visible lint off his shoulder. It was an intimate, claiming gesture. She was marking her territory right in front of me. Caleb preened under her touch, standing a little taller. He looked at me, his eyes full of pity mixed with disdain. You can come in now, Chloe, he said, sounding like a disappointed parent. Let's get this over with. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I'm coming, Caleb. The courtroom was cold. Judge Marlo Carter sat behind the high bench, looking bored. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp glasses and the demeanor of someone who had heard every lie a human being could tell. She had a stack of files in front of her and a clerk typing rapidly to her left. We took our places. Caleb and Gordon sat at the table to the right. I sat alone at the table on the left. Madison took a seat in the gallery directly behind Caleb, leaning forward so her perfume would drift over him. Case number 4920, the bailiff announced. Vance versus Vance, petition for dissolution of marriage. Judge Vance opened the file in front of her. She flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes scanning the lack of complexity. I see we have a joint petition, Judge Vance said, her voice dry. No minor children, no real estate, minimal joint assets. Petitioner waives spousal support. Respondent, that is you, Mr. Vance, waives any claim to the wife's personal effects. Is that correct? Gordon stood up, buttoning his jacket. That is correct, Your Honor. My client just wants a clean break. We have agreed to an equitable split of the checking account, which contains less than $2,000. We are ready to sign. Caleb was leaning back in his chair, tapping his pen on the table. He looked bored. He looked like a man who was already thinking about where he would take Madison for lunch to celebrate. Mrs. Vance? The judge looked at me. Do you agree to these terms? I stood up slowly. I do, Your Honor. However, there's the matter of the prenuptial agreement regarding separate property. Caleb snorted. It was a loud, ugly sound in the quiet room. He leaned over to Gordon and whispered, She's trying to keep her knitting supplies. Gordon suppressed a smile and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we acknowledge the prenuptial agreement. My client has no interest in Mrs. Vance's personal hobbies or small items acquired prior to the marriage. Judge Vance looked ready to bang the gavel. Very well, if there are no other motions. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound was jarring. Everyone turned. A court clerk, breathless and flushed, hurried down the center aisle. He was carrying a thick, black leather envelope. It wasn't a standard manila folder. It was textured, heavy, and sealed with red wax that had been stamped with an insignia. A bright red label was affixed to the front, Probate Urgent. State of Delaware. The clerk bypassed the bailiff and went straight to the judge's bench. Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor, the clerk said, his voice trembling slightly. This just arrived via courier from the Chancery Court in Delaware. It is marked for immediate inclusion in the Vance docket regarding asset distribution. Caleb frowned. He leaned toward Gordon. What is this? Did you file something? No, Gordon whispered back, looking confused. I didn't file anything. Judge Vance took the black envelope. She looked at the seal. She looked at the urgency stamp. The boredom vanished from her face, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. She picked up a letter opener and slit the seal. The sound of the tearing paper seemed to echo in the silence. She pulled out a stack of documents. The paper was thick, high-quality bond. She began to read. As her eyes moved down the first page, her expression shifted. Her eyebrows drew together. She stopped, blinked, and read the line again. She looked up from the paper, her gaze landing on me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Then she looked at Caleb. It was a different look. It was the look one gives to a man who is standing on a trapdoor without knowing the lever has been pulled. "Counsel," Judge Vance said. Her voice had changed. It was quieter, more serious. "Mr. Slate, are you aware of the contents of this filing?" Gordon Slate stood up, looking uneasy. "No, Your Honor, we have not been served with any new discovery. I object to the introduction of surprise evidence at this late stage." Judge Vance ignored him. She turned a page. "This is not evidence, Mr. Slate. This is a certified testamentary execution from the estate of Elias Halstead. It concerns the immediate vesting of assets to your wife, the sole beneficiary." Caleb laughed. He actually laughed. "Halstead? Who's that? Her uncle leaving her a used car?" "Mr. Vance, be quiet," the judge snapped. She didn't look up from the papers. "Mr. Slate, this document outlines a transfer of ownership for significant holdings. These assets are designated as separate property under the prenuptial agreement you just asked me to enforce." "Significant?" Gordon asked, his confidence wavering. "Your Honor, how significant can it be? My client's wife is an administrative assistant." Judge Vance lowered the papers. She took off her glasses. She looked directly at Gordon Slate. "Mr. Slate, I am looking at a valuation summary for a controlling interest in H. Halstead Maritime, 3 lithium mining consortiums in Nevada, and a blind trust listed on the International Exchange. The estimated value is not something I can pronounce easily without counting the zeros." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Madison Price froze in the gallery. Her hand, which had been resting near Caleb's shoulder, slowly pulled back. Caleb's face went pale. The smirk dropped off his lips as if it had been physically slapped away. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "That's impossible," he stammered. She's lying. It's a fake. Chloe, what is this?" "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the judge barked. "I object," Gordon shouted, trying to regain control of a room that was spinning away from him. "Your Honor, we request a recess. We have not had time to review this. This is an ambush. If there are assets of this magnitude, they should have been disclosed during discovery." Judge Vance picked up the black envelope. She held it like a weapon. "Mr. Slate," she said, her voice ice cold, "the court is not responsible for your failure to investigate the background of your client's spouse. You pushed for a quick decree. You insisted on the validity of the prenuptial agreement. You told me 10 minutes ago that you had no interest in her separate property. But these documents are certified," the judge continued. "They are from a higher court, and they are explicit." Caleb turned to look at me. For the first time in our marriage, he was really looking at me. He was searching for the timid, mouse-like woman he thought he had dominated. He was looking for the wife who clipped coupons and asked for permission to buy shoes. He didn't find her. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the table. I met his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the absolute calm of someone who had watched him dig his own grave for 3 years. He saw the recognition in my eyes. He saw the intelligence I had hidden behind silence. And in that terrifying second, Caleb realized the script he had been reading from was wrong. He wasn't the hero of this story. He wasn't the winner. He was the man who had signed away a kingdom because he was too arrogant to ask his wife who she really was. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't answer. I just watched him, waiting for the judge to finish reading the number that would ruin him. The silence in the courtroom wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses, her fingers trembling ever so slightly against the thick, cream-colored bond paper. She looked as though she was trying to translate a foreign language, but the words were plain English. They were just words that refused to reconcile with the dingy reality of a Baltimore family court. "The document," Judge Vance began, her voice gaining a forced steadiness, "is the last will and testament of Elias H. Halstead, dated 4 months ago, along with a sworn affidavit of paternity." She paused, looking over the rim of her glasses at me, then at Caleb. "It states that the individual known as Chloe Harris is in fact Chloe Halstead, the sole biological daughter and only heir of Elias H. Halstead. It further clarifies that the surname Harris was adopted legally upon her 18th birthday as a protective measure against kidnapping and extortion, a status maintained for security purposes." Caleb blinked, his mouth open slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like a man trying to remember how to breathe. The estate, the judge continued, flipping to the second page, is not structured as a single liquid sum. It is a conglomerate of holding companies, blind trusts, and direct ownership stakes. She began to read the list. It wasn't a list of flashy consumer goods. It wasn't a list of things you see on television commercials. It was a list of things that run the world. 100% controlling interest in H. Halstead Logistics and bonded warehousing, encompassing 42 ports of entry across North America and Europe. Majority shareholder of the Trident Maritime Risk Group, underwriting 60% of global commercial shipping insurance. Sole ownership of the Nevada Rare Earth Mineral Consortium. All intellectual property rights for the North Atlantic fiber optic cable infrastructure. The court reporter, a woman who looked like she'd seen everything, stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keys, her jaw slack. The assets include privately held land in Montana, Wyoming, and Argentina, totaling 3 million acres. The judge read on, her voice rising in disbelief. And the Halstead Sovereign Grant Fund. She stopped. She took a deep breath. The independent audit attached to this probate filing estimates the total valuation of the estate, adjusted for current market volatility, to be in excess of $1.2 trillion. The word hung in the air. Trillion. It was a number that didn't make sense. Million is a house. Billion is a skyscraper. Trillion is a country. A gasp swept through the gallery behind us. It wasn't loud. It was the sound of oxygen being sucked out of the room. Caleb didn't move. He didn't blink. He was frozen. His face a mask of absolute, terrifying comprehension. He was a man who worshipped money, who had sold his integrity for a lease Porsche and a chance to rub shoulders with partners who made $400,000 a year. And he had just realized that he had spent 3 years treating a woman worth $1.2 trillion like she was a burden on his wallet. I turned slightly to look at Madison. She wasn't looking at Caleb anymore. She was staring at the back of my head. Her face drained of all color. Her eyes were wide, calculating, terrified. She was a gold digger who had just realized she had spent months digging in a sandbox while standing next to a diamond mine. She knew in that instant that the game had changed. She knew that Caleb Vance was no longer a prize. He was the biggest fool in human history. There is more, Judge Vance said, breaking the trance. She pulled another document from the envelope. It was thinner, older. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. Attached to the probate execution order is a certified copy of a prenuptial addendum, notarized on the date of your marriage. Caleb's head snapped up. What? We signed a prenup. It protects my earnings. It does, the judge said, her voice sharpening. But there is an addendum. It appears to be page 12 of the document packet you submitted to the clerk on your wedding day. I remembered that day vividly. We were at the courthouse. Caleb was stressed, checking his watch, worried we would be late for the lunch reservation he'd made to impress his parents. The clerk had handed him a stack of papers, the license, the certificate, the standard prenuptial agreement he'd insisted upon, and the addendum my father's lawyers had quietly inserted into the pile. Just sign them, Chloe, he had said, tossing the pen at me after scribbling his own name. It's just bureaucratic nonsense. We don't have time to read fine print. This addendum, the judge read, states that any and all assets held by either party prior to the marriage or inherited during the marriage, regardless of the source, shall remain the sole and separate property of the original owner. It explicitly waives any claim to appreciation, commingling, or marital distribution. She looked up at Caleb. And, she added, Clause 4, Section B. It states that should either party contest the validity of this separate property in the event of a divorce, that party shall be liable for 100% of the opposing party's legal fees and punitive damages for wasting the court's time. Caleb shot up from his chair. The chair legs screeched against the floor, a violent sound that made the bailiff step forward, hand on his holster. That's a lie, Caleb screamed, his face turning a blotchy, violent red. She tricked me. I never saw that page. She slipped it in. I would never have signed that if I knew she had. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He couldn't say the number. You are alleging fraud? Judge Vance asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous octave. Yes, Caleb shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. She committed fraud. She hid her identity. She let me believe she was poor. That invalidates the contract. Mr. Vance, the judge said, leaning forward. You are an attorney, are you not? Yes, I am, Caleb stammered. And what is the first rule of contract law? Caleb stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The rule, the judge said, answering for him, is caveat subscriptor. Let the signer beware. You signed the document. Your signature is here, clear as day, right next to the notary seal. You had every opportunity to read it. You had every opportunity to ask why your wife's middle name on the document was listed as H. Halstead. I thought it was a maiden name. I thought it was nothing. Caleb pleaded, looking to Gordon Slate for help. But Gordon had stepped away from the table, physically distancing himself from his client. Gordon knew a losing battle when he saw one. You assumed. The judge corrected him. You assumed she was nothing, so you treated the paperwork with the same disrespect you treated her. That was your choice, Mr. Vance. And now it is your consequence. Caleb slumped back into his chair. He looked small. The swagger was gone. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic man who had held the world in his hands and thrown it away because he was too busy looking in the mirror. The court accepts the documents, Judge Vance declared, banging her gavel with a sense of finality that rang through the room. The assets listed in the Halstead probate are confirmed as the separate property of the wife. The husband has no claim. Not 1 cent. I looked at Caleb across the aisle. He was staring at the table, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. Did you get what you wanted, Caleb? I asked quietly. My voice was calm, carrying easily across the silent room. You wanted a quick divorce. You wanted to make sure I couldn't touch your money. You got exactly what you asked for. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. But before he could speak, the judge spoke again. Mrs. Vance, or rather, Ms. Halstead, the judge said. Since the financial disparity is now astronomical, and the husband has raised an accusation of fraud, do you wish to respond? I do, Your Honor, I said, standing up. I have a few motions of my own to file. Caleb flinched. He knew it wasn't over. He knew the check was about to come due. For every dinner, every insult, and every stolen dollar. Judge Vance did not hesitate. She was a woman who appreciated irony, but she appreciated the law even more. She looked at the documents spread before her, the ironclad prenuptial agreement Caleb had insisted upon, and the addendum that now served as his financial death warrant, and she made her decision with the speed of a guillotine blade. Based on the submitted evidence and the binding contract signed by both parties, Judge Vance announced, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The court finds the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable in its entirety. The assets held by the respondent, Ms. Halstead, including all inheritances and business interests, are confirmed as separate property. The petitioner, Mr. Vance, is entitled to 0% of the estate. She picked up a pen and signed the order with a sharp scratching sound. Judgment of absolute divorce is hereby granted, she continued. Each party will retain their own debts and liabilities. Case closed regarding the dissolution. It was over. In the eyes of the state of Maryland, we were no longer husband and wife. But Caleb couldn't let it go. He couldn't process the reality that he was walking away empty-handed from a fortune that could buy small nations. Wait, Your Honor, please! Caleb scrambled to his feet, ignoring the frantic tug on his sleeve from his lawyer. We can negotiate this. There must be an equitable distribution. I supported her for 3 years. I paid the rent. I bought the groceries. Surely that counts as a contribution to the marital estate. It was pathetic. He was trying to bill me for the price of milk and eggs while standing in the shadow of $1 trillion valuation. Gordon Slate, his face glistening with a sheen of cold sweat, grabbed Caleb's arm and yanked him down. Sit down, Caleb! Gordon hissed, loud enough for the front row to hear. Read the clause. If you contest the separate property and lose, you are liable for her legal fees. Do you know what the hourly rate is for the Halstead family attorneys? You will be bankrupt by lunchtime if you keep talking. Caleb shook him off, his eyes wild. I don't care. She defrauded me. I stood up. I didn't need permission. The room went silent. I did not defraud you, Caleb, I said. My voice was steady, contrasting with his frantic pitch. I simply allowed you to be yourself. And that is what you cannot forgive. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, while the dissolution is final, there is one outstanding matter regarding the financial conduct of Mr. Vance during the marriage. I am filing a motion for emergency injunctive relief and a request for forensic accounting. I pulled a thick file from my bag. It wasn't the black notebook I kept at home. This was a formal legal filing, prepared by Arthur Penhaligon's team, bound in blue legal backing. I walked to the bench and placed it before the judge. What is this? Caleb demanded. More lies! Mr. Vance, Judge Vance warned, her eyes narrowing. Counsel, control your client, or I will have him removed. The judge opened the file. Her eyes scanned the first page, and her expression hardened from professional detachment to judicial anger. This motion alleges, the judge read slowly, That Mr. Vance utilized the personal identification information of his wife to establish unauthorized lines of credit and a limited liability company known as Vance Strategic Holdings. Caleb froze. The color that had risen to his face drained away instantly, leaving him looking gray and sickly. It further alleges, the judge continued, that funds from the joint marital account were siphoned into this shell company to conceal expenditures related to extramarital affairs and personal luxury goods. That is absurd, Caleb shouted. But his voice cracked. She's making it up. I never did that. The evidence is attached as Exhibit A through Exhibit D, I said calmly. You will find the articles of incorporation for the LLC. The guarantor is listed as Chloe Harris. The signature is a digital forgery. I have included a handwriting analysis comparing it to my actual signature on our marriage license. They do not match. I pointed to the document in the judge's hand. Furthermore, Exhibit B contains the transaction logs. Mr. Vance believed he was being clever by moving money in small increments. $300 here, $500 there. He labeled them as consulting fees. But if you look at the cross-reference bank statements in Exhibit C, you will see that every time a consulting fee was withdrawn, a corresponding purchase was made within the hour. I turned to look at the gallery. I looked directly at Madison Price and I added, Exhibit D is a manifest of those purchases, specifically a series of flight bookings to Miami and hotel reservations at the Ritz-Carlton under the names Caleb Vance and Madison Price. These were paid for using the credit card issued to the fraudulent LLC, the credit card that is legally in my name. Madison let out a small, strangled sound. She stared at the exhibit list on the table near Caleb where a copy had been placed. She could see her name typed in black and white. She wasn't just a mistress anymore. She was a beneficiary of identity theft. She was an accomplice. I didn't know, Madison whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at Caleb with horror. You said it was a company expense account. You said the firm paid for those trips. Shut up, Madison, Caleb snapped, turning on her. Mr. Vance, the judge slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. You will address this court, not the gallery. These are serious allegations. We are talking about identity theft, fraud, and misappropriation of marital assets. It's a setup, Your Honor, Caleb pleaded, sweating profusely now. She hacked my computer. She planted those files. Why would I need to steal her identity? She was a nobody. She had no credit. Actually, I interrupted. My credit score is 850. And because I never used it, it was pristine. You, however, had maxed out every card you owned. You needed a fresh host to feed on. She's lying, Caleb insisted. But he was flailing. You have no proof I opened that account. Anyone could have done it. Exhibit E, I said simply. The judge flipped to the last tab. These are the IP address logs provided by the Internet Service Provider, I explained. The application for the credit card and the LLC incorporation were submitted from a specific IP address on October 4th at 11:45 at night. That IP address belongs to the residential Wi-Fi of our apartment, and the MAC address of the device used to submit the application matches the serial number of your firm-issued laptop. I paused to let that sink in. Unless you are suggesting that I broke into your password-protected work computer, which requires a biometric fingerprint scan to unlock, and framed you while you were sleeping next to me, the evidence is irrefutable. Caleb stared at the page. The technical numbers stared back at him, the digital fingerprints. He didn't even know he was leaving. He looked at Gordon Slate. Gordon was packing his briefcase. Your Honor, Gordon said quietly, standing up. I request a brief recess to confer with my client regarding his rights against self-incrimination. Gordon was smart. He knew this had just crossed the line from civil court to criminal court. Denied, Judge Vance said. I have seen enough to make a ruling on the assets. She looked at Caleb with a mixture of disgust and pity. Mr. Vance, based on the prima facie evidence of financial misconduct and potential fraud, I am issuing an immediate freezing order on all accounts bearing your name, solely or jointly. You are prohibited from liquidating, transferring, or encumbering any assets until a full forensic accounting is completed. You can't do that, Caleb gasped. I have bills. I have the lease on my car. You should have thought of that before you used your wife's identity to pay for your vacations, the judge retorted. Furthermore, I am referring this file to the district attorney's office for review regarding the allegations of identity theft and forgery. No, Caleb whispered. No, please. This will ruin my career. Your career is not my concern, Judge Vance said. Justice is. She raised the gavel one last time. The divorce is final. The restraining order on assets is effective immediately. The clerk will notify the banks within the hour. Bang! Case closed. The sound of the gavel signaled the end of our marriage. But as the echo faded, the sound of the heavy wooden doors opening behind us signaled something else. 2 uniformed court officers stepped inside, their eyes fixed on Caleb. I picked up my bag. I didn't look back at him. I had told him the truth. I didn't need his money. I just needed the world to see exactly what kind of man he was. And now, it was all a matter of public record. The courtroom began to empty, the air still vibrating with the judge's final command. The court officers stood by the exits, their presence a silent reminder that the authority in this room had shifted away from Caleb Vance. He was stuffing papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. He looked like a man trying to pack a parachute after he had already hit the ground. Gordon Slate, his attorney, was already packing up. Gordon was a mercenary. He knew when a battle was lost, and he had no intention of dying on this hill with a client who had lied to him. He clicked his briefcase shut and looked at Caleb with a cold, professional distance. "I'll call you later to discuss the fee structure for the criminal defense referral," Gordon said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You're going to need a specialist for the fraud charges." Caleb ignored him. He zipped his bag shut and turned to glare at me. His face was a mask of red-hot humiliation. He clearly thought this was the end of it. He thought that because the gavel had banged, he could walk out of here, lick his wounds, and eventually rebuild his ego at his job. He thought he still had his career, his status, his place in the world where he was the rising star. And I was just a memory. He was wrong. I didn't leave. I walked toward him. I moved slowly, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. It was a sound he used to ignore, the sound of his wife coming to bring him coffee or clean up his mess. Now it sounded like a countdown. Caleb looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want, Chloe? You got the money. You humiliated me. Are you coming to gloat? Is that what billionaires do?" I stopped 3 feet away from him. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, flat tone of a person reading a weather report. "I don't care about the money, Caleb. I told you that. The money is just a tool. This," I tapped the file folder I was holding against my palm, "is about consequences." "What is that?" he snapped. "This is a copy of the dossier I sent via courier to the State Bar Disciplinary Board exactly 45 minutes ago," I said. Caleb froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked painful. Beside him, Gordon Slate stopped halfway to the door. Gordon turned around, his eyes widening. He knew what those words meant. "You reported me?" Caleb whispered. "For what?" "Because I was mean to you." "The bar does not care about a bad marriage," I replied. "They care about ethics. And they certainly care about felonies." I opened the folder. Section 1. I recited, not needing to look at the paper. "Unauthorized disclosure of privileged client information, specifically the grand jury witness list for the Thompson case. You took a photo of it and sent it to your personal email so you could work from home. Then you forwarded it to Madison because you wanted to brag about how important the case was. That is a violation of attorney-client privilege and a breach of federal confidentiality laws." Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Madison, who was standing near the railing, her face pale. Section 2. I continued relentless. "Billing fraud. You have been padding your hours on the Henderson corporate merger. You billed them for 20 hours of research on a weekend when you were actually in Miami with Madison. I included the flight logs and the time-stamped emails where you instructed your paralegal to falsify the timesheets." Gordon Slate let out a low whistle. He looked at Caleb with absolute disgust. "You padded the Henderson bill? Caleb, are you insane? They're the firm's biggest client. I was going to do the work later." Caleb stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was just a placeholder." "It is theft," I said. "And Section 3, financial impropriety involving a spouse's identity. The fraud you committed against me, using my name to open credit lines, is a violation of the moral turpitude clause of your license. You are not just going to be sued, Caleb. You are going to be disbarred." Caleb grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. His knees were buckling. Being a lawyer was his entire identity. It was the only thing he had that made him feel superior to the world. Without that license, he was just a man with debt and a criminal record. "You can't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Chloe, please. This destroys everything. I worked so hard for this degree. You know how hard I studied." "I do know," I said. "I was the one making the coffee while you studied. I was the one paying the electric bill so you had light to read by. And you used that degree to abuse the very person who helped you get it." "I'll settle," he said frantically. "I'll sign anything. Just withdraw the complaint." "It's too late," I said. Once the bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. But there is one more thing you should know. I closed the folder. You're worried about your position at Bramwell and Kersey. You think that if you can just talk your way out of this, you might still have a job. I'm a top associate, Caleb said, clutching at a straw of hope. The partners love me. They'll protect me. The partners are busy right now, I said. They are currently in a closed-door meeting regarding a merger. Caleb frowned. How do you know that? That is confidential firm business. It was confidential, I corrected him. Until this morning when the acquisition was finalized. Bramwell and Kersey is being acquired by the Northwind Council Group. Caleb's eyes widened. Northwind? They're huge. They're the premier corporate litigation firm on the East Coast. That's good news. They'll need good lawyers. Northwind Council Group, I said slowly, enunciating every syllable, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Halstead Sovereign Grant Fund. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a man realizing the ground he was standing on did not exist. Caleb looked at me. He looked at the simple dress I was wearing. He looked at the woman he had called boring. Simple and unambitious. You own Northwind? He whispered. My estate owns it, I said. Which means effectively, I own Bramwell and Kersey. I own the building you work in. I own the servers your emails are stored on. I own the chair you sit in. He looked like he was going to be sick. The realization was crushing him. The place where he had built his shrine to himself, his office, his title, his reputation, now belonged to the wife he had discarded. So that's it, he spat out, trying to rally some anger to cover his fear. You're going to fire everyone? You're going to burn the company down just to get back at me? No, I said. That is what you would do, Caleb. Because you are petty. I straightened my spine. I have already issued a directive to the transition team. All support staff, the paralegals, the secretaries, the janitors, the people you treat like furniture, are receiving a 10% retention bonus and guaranteed job security for 2 years. The partners who look the other way while you billed for fake hours are being audited. And the associates who violated ethical standards. I looked him dead in the eye. They are being terminated for cause. Effective immediately. I turned away from him. There was nothing left to say. He was a hollow shell of a man, stripped of his pretenses. Caleb spun around, desperate for an ally. He looked at the only other person in the room who had been on his side. Madison, he said, reaching out a hand. Madison, wait! We can fix this. I just need to make some calls. We can. Madison Price did not take his hand. She looked at him like he was a contagious disease. She had heard everything. She heard about the debt. She heard about the fraud. She heard that he was about to be unemployed and disbarred. She looked at me, the woman she had mocked for being plain, and saw the power that radiated off me. Then she looked back at Caleb. Don't touch me, Madison hissed. She clutched her purse to her chest and turned her back on him, walking fast toward the exit. She did not look back. Caleb stood alone in the center of the courtroom. His lawyer had distanced himself. His mistress had abandoned him. His wife had outgrown him. I walked past Gordon Slate on my way out. He stepped aside respectfully, nodding his head. Miss Halstead, he murmured. Mr. Slate, I replied. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air tasted different out here. It tasted clean. I had not just divorced a husband. I had exorcised a ghost. And for the first time in years, the future didn't look like a long, dark tunnel. It looked like a blank page. And I held the pen. Desperation is a chaotic architect. When a man like Caleb Vance realizes his foundation is built on quicksand, he doesn't try to find solid ground. Instead, he tries to pull everyone else down into the mud with him. For 48 hours after the court hearing, Caleb went on a scorched earth offensive. He couldn't fight me in the courtroom, because the law was absolute. So, he took the fight to the court of public opinion. He hired a crisis management firm, using a credit card I had already cancelled, though he likely didn't know that yet, and launched a narrative that was as loud as it was pathetic. I sat in the secure conference room of the Halstead family offices, watching the story unfold on a large monitor. A legal gossip blog had picked up his press release. The headline read, Promising attorney duped by billionaire imposter, the Caleb Vance story. He's playing the victim card, Arthur Penhaligon noted, tapping a finger on the mahogany table. He's claiming that your use of the name Harris constituted a material breach of trust that induced him into a fraudulent marriage. He says he's the injured party because he was forced to sign a prenuptial agreement under false pretenses. I read the article. Caleb was painting himself as a hard-working, blue-collar lawyer who had been preyed upon by a manipulative heiress playing a twisted game of Poverty tourism. He claimed I had mocked his ambition. He claimed I had financially abused him by hiding my resources while watching him struggle. It was a compelling fiction. It was also a tactical error. He filed a motion this morning. Arthur continued, sliding a document across the table. He's asking the court to annul the prenuptial agreement based on fraud in the inducement. He wants full discovery of your assets dating back 10 years. He thinks if he makes enough noise, we will pay him a settlement just to make him go away. He doesn't know my father's policy on blackmail, I said quietly. We don't pay. We prosecute. Precisely. Arthur nodded. We have already prepared the response. The name change was legally processed by the Department of Justice when you were 18. It is sealed for national security reasons, related to the strategic mineral assets. His claim that it was a trick will not survive the first motion to dismiss. Furthermore, we have video footage from the notary office on your wedding day. The clerk asks him 3 times if he wants to read the addendum. He checks his watch and says, "Just show me where to sign so we can get lunch." End quote. File it, I said. But don't just defend counterattack. If he wants discovery, give him discovery. Demand his communications regarding the fraud he claims to be a victim of. Caleb thought he was starting a media war. He didn't realize he was walking into a trap set by his own paranoia. The real blow, however, did not come from my lawyers. It came from the person he thought he owned. That afternoon, Arthur received a call from a prepaid burner phone. It was Madison Price. She was terrified. She had seen the freezing order on Caleb's accounts. She knew that her name was listed on the flight manifests, and the hotel bills paid for with stolen money. She was smart enough to know that in a conspiracy charge, the first person to talk gets the deal, and the second person gets the prison sentence. She agreed to meet us, not at a fancy restaurant, but at a nondescript coffee shop in the suburbs. She wore sunglasses and a hoodie, looking nothing like the polished shark she tried to be at the office. She slid her phone across the table to Arthur without saying a word. "What is this?" Arthur asked. "Read the thread from last night," Madison whispered. Her hands were shaking around her paper cup. I looked at the screen. It was a conversation between her and Caleb. Timestamped at 2 in the morning. "Caleb, Madison, you need to go into the office early. Access the server. Delete the folder marked Vance Personal. Then I need you to copy the client list for the Henderson merger and put it on a flash drive. Don't email it. Physical copy only. Madison, Caleb, that's obstruction of justice, and stealing client files is a felony. I can't do that. Caleb, Madison, you'll do it if you want a future. I am going to beat this. Madison, I am going to get a settlement from her. Millions. But I need leverage. I need those files to trade with Northwind. If you don't help me, you are on your own. Remember who put you in that job." I looked up at Madison. "He asked you to destroy evidence and steal proprietary data from a firm that I now effectively own. He tried to bribe me this morning," Madison said, her voice bitter. "He met me in the parking garage. He told me that if I did this for him, we would go to the Caymans. He said we would be a power couple. He said I owed him because he made me." She laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. "He told me once that I should love him because he was brilliant. That he was the smartest man in the room. I told him today, right to his face, Caleb, you are not brilliant. You are just brilliant at looking down on people, and right now, you are looking up from the bottom of a hole." "You recorded the conversation?" Arthur asked. "Yes," Madison said. "And I didn't delete the folder. I made a copy for you." She pushed a small USB drive across the table. "I don't want money," Madison said, looking at me with eyes that were pleading. "I just want immunity. I don't want to go to jail for his ego. I was stupid. But I am not a thief. If you testify," I said, "and if this drive contains what you say it contains, the corporate counsel will decline to press charges against you for the credit card usage. We will consider you a cooperating witness." Madison let out a sob of relief. "Thank you." He is crazy, Chloe. He really thinks he is going to win." Caleb's lawsuit to annul the prenup moved forward with blinding speed, but not in the direction he intended. The judge reviewing his motion, Judge Vance, was not amused by his public theatrics and had expedited the hearing. She issued a preliminary order to prove that Caleb was financially disadvantaged by the marriage. The court demanded a complete forensic audit of his personal finances to compare against his claims of poverty. It was the legal equivalent of stepping on a landmine. Caleb had to submit his bank statements. He had to submit his emails. He had to submit the records of the consulting business he had set up. He tried to redact them. He tried to black out the lines that showed transfers to offshore gambling sites and payments to escort services. Expenses he had hidden even from Madison. But the court order was specific. Unredacted originals only. The more he tried to prove I was a fraud, the more he proved he was a criminal. The final nail in the coffin arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. Caleb was at his temporary apartment, a dingy efficiency he had rented after being locked out of our home. He was likely drafting another press release or screaming at a junior associate over the phone. I wasn't there, but the private investigator we had hired to monitor him reported the scene in detail. A courier arrived at his door. Caleb probably thought it was a settlement offer. He probably thought I had cracked under the pressure of his bad press and was sending a check. He opened the door, wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, looking nothing like the master of the universe he pretended to be. The courier did not hand him a check. He handed him a thick envelope with the seal of the State Bar Association. It was not a warning. It was a summons for an emergency suspension hearing. Usually, the bar takes months to investigate complaints. They move at a glacial pace. But when the evidence includes a recorded conversation of an attorney soliciting a paralegal to commit grand larceny and obstruction of justice, they move very, very fast. Madison's USB drive had found its way to the disciplinary committee. Caleb stood in the hallway of his cheap apartment building, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. He tore open the envelope. I imagine his hands were shaking. I imagine he read the words, immediate interim suspension, and allegations of moral turpitude. He had started the week trying to paint me as a villain. He was ending it as a man who was about to lose the only thing he actually loved, his title. He had chosen to play dirty. He had chosen to turn a divorce into a war. He just forgot that when you throw mud at a person who owns the ground you stand on, you are the one who ends up buried. I received a text from Arthur Penhaligon 10 minutes later. Summons served. Hearing set for Monday. He has no counsel. Gordon Slate formally withdrew an hour ago. I set my phone down on the table of my new penthouse overlooking the harbor. The view was expansive, filled with lights and ships moving silently in the night. Ships that, in one way or another, answered to the name H. Halstead. Caleb had wanted a reaction. He was about to get the final one. The rain had turned into a sleet that coated the city in a sheen of dirty ice. It was 1 a.m, the night before the disciplinary hearing that would determine whether Caleb Vance remained a lawyer or became a cautionary tale. My phone had been vibrating incessantly for 3 hours. 17 missed calls. 12 voice messages ranging from sobbing apologies to incoherent rage. Finally, a text message came through that made me pause. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. Meet me or I send the IRS a tip about Daddy's tax evasion. It was a bluff, of course, but it was a desperate bluff. And desperate men are dangerous because they are unpredictable. I knew I had to control the explosion before it happened. I agreed to meet him at the Silver Spoon, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city limits. It was the kind of place with flickering neon signs and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. I didn't go alone. Arthur Penhaligon sat 3 booths behind the spot I had chosen, his back to me, nursing a cup of tea. He looked like an elderly insomniac, completely harmless in his tweed coat. But I knew that inside his jacket pocket was a high-fidelity directional microphone, and on the seat beside him was a witness affidavit already drafted, waiting for a signature. Caleb arrived 10 minutes late. The transformation was shocking. The man who had strutted into the courtroom just a week ago in a $3,000 suit was gone. In his place was a specter. He was wearing a raincoat over a wrinkled dress shirt. No tie. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark, bruised circles that spoke of sleepless nights and chemically induced wakefulness. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. He looked like a man whose internal architecture had collapsed. He slid into the booth opposite me, bringing with him the smell of damp wool and stale whiskey. "You came," he said, his voice raspy. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "I knew you would come. You still care, don't you, Chloe? After everything, there's still something there." "I am here because you threatened my family, Caleb," I said, my hands folded on the table. "You said you wanted to talk." "Talk?" He laughed, a jittery, nervous sound. He signaled the waitress for coffee, his hands shaking noticeably. "I don't want to hurt you, Chloe. I really don't. I need a lifeline. You have no idea what they're doing to me. The Bar Association, the partners, they're treating me like a criminal." "You are a criminal, Caleb," I said softly. "Identity theft is a crime." "That was a misunderstanding," he hissed, leaning across the table. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed liquidity to maintain appearances until the partnership kickback came through. You know how this industry is. If you don't look successful, you aren't successful." "What do you want?" I asked. He licked his lips. "I need you to drop the complaint with the bar. Tell them it was a domestic dispute that got out of hand. Tell them I had your permission to use the name. If you do that, the fraud charges go away. And, he paused, glancing around the empty diner to make sure no one was listening. I need a loan. Just until I get back on my feet. $500,000. It's nothing to you. It's pocket change for a Halstead. He leaned closer. You write me a check, I move to Chicago, start over, and you never see me again. And if I say no? Caleb's expression shifted instantly. The pathetic ex-husband vanished, replaced by the cornered rat. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Then I'd blow the whistle. You think I haven't been digging? I spent the last 48 hours going through every public record of Halstead logistics. I found the shell companies in Panama. I found the consulting fees paid to lobbyists in D.C. Your father built that empire on loopholes, Chloe. If I go to the press and tell them the great Elias H. Halstead is running a tax evasion scheme, the stock price will tank. The investigations alone will tie your assets up for years. He looked smug. He thought he had played an ace. He thought he had found the leverage that would force the giant to kneel. I took a sip of my water. I felt a profound sense of pity for him. Not because he was losing, but because he was so painfully average in his thinking. Is that it? I asked. That's your leverage? It's enough to send your dad to prison? Caleb, I said, keeping my voice level. Do you know what a voluntary compliance audit is? He frowned. What? 6 months ago, before my father's health declined, we invited the IRS and the SEC to conduct a full, unrestricted audit of the entire Halstead portfolio. We gave them access to everything. Panama, the lobbyists, the mineral rights. Everything. Caleb's face went slack. Why? Why would you do that? Because when you have as much money as we do, you don't need to cheat. You just need to be patient. We paid a settlement for some minor clerical errors, about $12 million, which is roughly what our shipping division makes in 6 hours, and we received a certificate of good standing from the federal government. The Halstead books are cleaner than a church hymn book. We are audit-proof. I watched the hope die in his eyes. It was a physical thing, like a light bulb burning out. So, I continued, go ahead. Call the press. Call the IRS. They'll just send you a copy of the closing letter they sent us last month. Caleb slumped against the vinyl booth. He ran a hand through his hair, gripping the roots. I'm dead, he whispered. I'm actually dead. Why are you so desperate for money, Caleb? I asked. It isn't just the lifestyle, is it? You're terrified. Why? He looked at me, his eyes wild and unfocused. The facade was gone. He needed to confess. He needed someone to understand the pressure he was under. I messed up, he muttered. I messed up with the Reardon accounts. Which accounts? I pressed. The escrow, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. The Reardon settlement. It was $2 million. It was sitting in the client trust account, just sitting there for 3 months, waiting for the judge to sign the final order. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the abyss. What did you do with the trust account, Caleb? I didn't steal it, he said quickly, defensive. I borrowed against it. I had a sure thing. A crypto investment that was supposed to double in a week. I was going to put the principal back before anyone noticed, and keep the profit. I just wanted to be independent, Chloe. I wanted to have my own money so I didn't have to feel like your husband. You took client money from an escrow account to gamble on crypto. I stated flatly. I was going to put it back, he pleaded, but the market crashed. I lost 40% in 2 days. The payout is due next week. Chloe, if the money isn't in the account when the judge signs the order on Tuesday, I go to prison. Not for fraud. For embezzlement. Federal prison. He reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I pulled back. Please, he begged, tears actually forming in his eyes now. I need that $500,000 to cover the hole. If I can fill the account, no one has to know. I can resign quietly. I can disappear. Just save me from this one thing. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked me for counting pennies. He had risked his entire life, his freedom, and his client's security because of his greed. He had violated the most sacred rule of law. You never, ever touch the client's money. You said you borrowed it, I said slowly. But you took it without permission, used it for personal gain, and lost it. That is not borrowing, Caleb. It was a temporary loan, he insisted, his voice rising, unaware that he was shouting his own confession into the empty diner. I am the signatory on the account. I had the authority to move the funds. I just moved them to the wrong place. It's a banking error. That's all I will tell them. You moved $2 million to a personal crypto wallet? Yes. But I can fix it if you help me. I stared at him for a long moment. He really believed that money could fix this. He believed that if he just plugged the hole, the crime didn't happen. He didn't understand that the crime was the breach of trust, not just the loss of funds. "I can't help you, Caleb," I said. "I won't." Caleb's face hardened. The desperation turned into something ugly and cold. He realized I wasn't going to save him. "Fine," he spat, sliding out of the booth. "Be that way. You think you're so high and mighty, but I'm a survivor, Chloe. I will find the money. I know people. And when I get out of this hole, I am coming for you. You better watch your back." He threw a crumpled $20 bill on the table, likely one of the last in his wallet, and stormed out of the diner. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the threat he had just left hanging in the air. I watched him go. He walked out into the rain, hunching his shoulders against the wind, convinced that he had just delivered a terrifying ultimatum. He thought he had scared me. He thought he still had moves left to play. I waited until his taillights faded into the dark. "Did you get that?" I asked, not turning around. Arthur Penhaligon stood up from the booth behind me. He walked over, holding a small digital recorder. He pressed a button, and Caleb's voice, clear and undeniable, played back. "I moved $2 million to a personal crypto wallet. I just moved them to the wrong place. It is a banking error. That is all I will tell them." "Clear as a bell," Arthur said, his voice grim. "Admitting to commingling funds and embezzlement. That's a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years, give or take." "He thinks he has until Tuesday," I said, standing up and smoothing my coat. "He doesn't," Arthur replied. "I will have this delivered to the district attorney and the senior partners at Bramwell and Kersey by 8 o'clock this morning. They will lock the accounts before he can even try to find people to fix it." "Good," I said. I looked out the window at the empty parking lot. Caleb Vance had just signed his own death warrant, and he had done it while trying to convince me he was a survivor. "Let's go, Arthur," I said. "We have a hearing to attend." Monday morning arrived with the heaviness of a funeral procession. The sky over Baltimore was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that never quite broke, mirroring the atmosphere inside the glass-walled conference room of Bramwell and Kersey. This was not a courtroom, but it felt like an execution chamber. Caleb Vance sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single weekend. His suit, usually immaculate, was wrinkled at the elbows. His tie was loosened, and his eyes darted nervously between the faces of the people surrounding him. To his left sat the 3 senior partners of his firm, men he had once idolized and tried to mimic. To his right sat the disciplinary committee from the State Bar, who had convened an emergency session due to the severity of the allegations. And at the head of the table, flanked by Arthur Penhaligon and the new corporate oversight team from Northwind Council Group, sat me. Caleb looked at me, expecting anger. He expected the scorned wife. He did not understand that I had left that role behind days ago. I was not there as his wife. I was there as the majority shareholder of the entity that owned his career. "Let us begin," the lead auditor from Northwind said, opening a thick binder. "We are here to address the immediate employment status and licensure of Mr. Caleb Vance following credible reports of gross misconduct." Caleb cleared his throat, his voice thin and reedy. "I object to the presence of Ms. Halstead. This is a conflict of interest. She is a hostile party in a personal divorce proceeding. Ms. Halstead is the chairwoman of the Oversight Trust," Arthur replied calmly. "She is the only person in this room with the authority to decide whether this firm is liquidated or salvaged. Your objection is noted and ignored." The evidence was presented with surgical precision. It was not a debate. It was an autopsy. First came the server logs. The IT director projected the timeline onto the smart screen on the wall. It showed the unauthorized access to the partner drive. It showed the download of the Henderson client list. It showed the attempt to wipe the logs. An attempt that failed because the system had been mirrored to a secure off-site server the moment the acquisition by my company began. "You stole proprietary data," one of the senior partners said, looking at Caleb with profound disappointment. "You were going to sell our clients to a competitor." "I was just backing up my own work," Caleb lied. But the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. "Next item," the auditor said. "The Reardon escrow account." A collective gasp went around the room as the bank statements were displayed. $2 million transferred out of a client trust and into a crypto exchange wallet registered to Caleb Vance. "I can explain that," Caleb said, standing up, his hands shaking. "It was a temporary liquidity issue. The funds are in transit. They will be back by tomorrow. We checked the wallet this morning," the auditor said, his voice flat. "The balance is zero. The money is gone, Mr. Vance." Caleb sank back into his chair. He looked at Gordon Slate, who had been sitting silently in the corner. "Gordon," Caleb pleaded. "Say something." Tell them about the stress I've been under. Gordon Slate stood up. He buttoned his jacket and picked up his briefcase. I am withdrawing as counsel, Gordon said. He did not look at Caleb. He looked at the disciplinary committee. I cannot represent a client who has committed perjury in my presence, and who has engaged in the theft of client funds. I am ethically bound to report this myself. Gordon, no! Caleb cried out. You can't leave me. I am already gone, Gordon said, walking out the door. The silence he left behind was deafening. We have one final piece of evidence, I said. I signaled Arthur. He placed the digital recorder on the center of the table and pressed play. The sound of the diner filled the room, the clatter of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator, and then Caleb's voice, clear and arrogant. I moved $2 million to a personal crypto wallet. I just moved them to the wrong place. It is a banking error. That is all I will tell them. The recording ended. The head of the bar disciplinary committee closed his folder. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Vance, he said, in 30 years of practice, I have rarely seen a case of self-destruction this complete. Your license to practice law in the state of Maryland is immediately suspended pending a formal disbarment hearing. We are forwarding the evidence of embezzlement to the district attorney's office. You should expect to be taken into custody within the hour. You can't do this, Caleb shouted, panic finally taking over. I'm a partner. I brought in millions for this firm. You are fired, the senior partner snapped. Effective immediately. And we are scrubbing your name from every case file. You never worked here. The door opened and Madison Price walked in. She was escorted by a corporate security officer. Caleb's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second. Madison! Tell them I never told you to delete anything. Madison stopped at the end of the table. She looked at Caleb, huddled in his chair, stripped of his power and his dignity. She looked at me, sitting at the head of the table. I am testifying under the Whistleblower Protection Clause, Madison said, her voice steady. Caleb ordered me to destroy the files on Sunday night. He told me that if I didn't help him, he would ruin my career. He said he needed the client list to blackmail the new owners. You traitor! Caleb screamed, lunging forward. The security guard stepped in, pushing him back into his chair. I am not a traitor, Madison said, her eyes cold. I am just the person you thought was stupid enough to go down with your ship. I am not. She turned and walked out. It was done. The career he had built on lies was dust. The reputation he cherished was destroyed. He was facing prison, bankruptcy, and public humiliation. Caleb sat there breathing heavily. He looked up at the ceiling, then slowly lowered his gaze to me. His eyes were filled with a toxic mix of hatred and confusion. Are you happy? He whispered. Is this what you wanted? You win, Chloe. You're the billionaire. You crushed the little guy. Are you going to give a speech now? Are you going to tell me how much you hate me? I stood up. The room went silent again. Everyone waited for the final blow. They expected me to yell. They expected me to revel in his destruction. I looked at the senior partners. Gentlemen, I said, this firm is now under the umbrella of H. Halstead Sovereign. My first executive order is regarding the staff. Caleb frowned, confused. The paralegals, the administrative assistants, and the support staff who were bullied or coerced by Mr. Vance are not to be penalized. I continued. I am establishing a legal defense fund for any employee who was forced to be complicit in his fraud. Furthermore, the client whose funds were stolen will be reimbursed immediately from the firm's insurance reserve, plus interest. We will not let an innocent family suffer because of one man's greed. I turned to the stenographer. Let the record show, I said clearly, that this action is not a personal vendetta. This is not the result of a divorce. This is the consequence of an ethical choice. Mr. Vance was not destroyed by a wealthy ex-wife. He was destroyed by his own refusal to be a decent human being. I picked up my portfolio. I did not look at Caleb. Meeting adjourned. I walked toward the door. Chloe! Caleb shouted. His voice was cracked, broken. Chloe, wait. Look at me. I was your husband. I stopped. My hand hovered over the door handle. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him out of the corner of my eye. You were never my husband, Caleb, I said softly. You were just a man who was in love with a reflection in the mirror. And now the glass is broken. I opened the door and walked out. I did not slam it. I simply let it click shut behind me. Inside the room, Caleb Vance stood alone amidst a stack of incriminating documents. He was surrounded by people who used to respect him, but now looked at him like he was a stranger. And in that silence, the cruelest realization of all finally hit him. He realized that I hadn't destroyed him to prove I was powerful. I hadn't destroyed him because I was angry. I had simply stopped holding him up. He had spent 3 years thinking he was the giant, and I was the ant. He had spent 3 years thinking I was nothing. And because he was so busy looking down on me, he never saw the cliff he was walking toward. He had signed his own sentence the day he decided that kindness was a weakness, and that his wife was disposable. He was right about one thing, though. He was finally alone at the top of his own world. A king of absolutely nothing. So tell me, after hearing all of this, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to teach someone a hard lesson they desperately needed to learn? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. It really helps the channel out.